as I say, we're at the really pointed end, the sharp end of the Gospel of Mark, and the business end of where it all takes place, um, and where this radical newness in life unfolds in and of itself. And I pray so much for peace in our world, because I don't think the clarity of the gospel that we have, I think, gained through this kind of Gerardian reading, which combined with the biblical critical reading of the text, um, kind of narrative criticism, that kind of stuff, unfolds so much of the depth of the gospel, especially Mark's gospel, in terms of Jesus' actual confrontation with the way of the world, not with any kind of cosmic scheme to set things right at this kind of metaphysical level, whereby we can then get to heaven. This overlay of Neoplatonism, essentially, that's what it is, upon the gospel. But we've only really got the tools to escape from that since Girard. Beforehand, you could be a liberal critic of the gospel text, and do the demythologization thing that with Bultmann, and before that in 19th century biblical scholarship, questioning the authenticity of historical traditions, all that kind of stuff. But that kind of led you nowhere religiously, shall we say, relation in terms of spiritual relationship, in terms of where you would be able to go with your heart and soul, in terms of leading you beyond your narrow human existence. All that early scholarship couldn't provide that. But with Girard and the overturning of our basic anthropology, which he's posited, this huge doorway opens up in the understanding of the scripture, and we just haven't had time to convey this. So that's what I'm remarking on, that we really haven't had time to convey this uh, in mass terms. If you think about the early Pentecost conversions, what is it, 2,000 or 3,000 a day were converted through the Holy Spirit, and we've not really had the opportunity in the situation to do anything like that, because all this is so new. So I really pray in God's providence that we will have time to communicate this gospel, and that many people will begin to understand it and to kind of download it in a profound way, so that it does, and communities, it does affect communities. So it's not just an intellectual exercise, which in some ways is what we do. I mean, yes, we have to do that, and I think as a group here that's here today, we do more than that, but because we're together in prayer and faith and hope. But still, we still have a long way to go in terms of communicating this as a way of being in the world. So when we get to the actual business end of the gospel, where Jesus has his final meal, is betrayed, there's this kind of bookending and betrayal. There's Judas, and then there's Peter, and they reflect each other. It's the human betrayal, the handing over of Jesus to violence. I mean, that's essentially what's happening. And now, with the passage which you were going to do tonight, we see that actually occurring. It's the moment of handing over. So that in the Greek, betrayal and handing over are basically the same words. Paradidomai, to hand someone. So Judas is the one who hands Jesus over. He betrays him, but also Jesus is handed over to Gentiles in passive a passive verb. He is handed over because that's overall what's happening. It's not just simply you've got these characters, Judas and Peter, handing him over, betraying him. Is he is being handed over. He's being kind of like dumped in this pit of violence, which of course is, through Girard, we understand that this is what happens to many people. And Girard, he says that there's nothing exceptional about the crucifixion, and we know that historically that many people were crucified by the Romans by others before them. But what's different about Jesus is that he sustains it in faith and in relationship with his Father, and then in resurrection. So it's all brought up to the surface as the possibility of a radical new intervention in human life. But we've not really understood this, I don't think, and it's certainly not in popular form, certainly not in evangelical terms. My Heather, who's not here tonight, she won't mind me taking her name in vain, but I mean, she talks about her her beloved relatives who are, some of them are kind of these fundamentalists who have this dispensationalist point of view. And when things begin hotting up in the Middle East, they start salivating that this is the end of times, and the second coming is happening right now. It's going to happen very quickly, and all the bad people are going to be killed. They're going to be roasted. They're going to be fried, and the good people are going to be taken up to heaven. I mean, it's an incredibly degraded version of Christianity. It really is in every sense, and she's trying to communicate, but that is such a powerful thing because it enlists violence, enlists incredible violence, the contemporary form of violence, like apocalyptic violence, as a Christian phenomenon. So it enlists that and makes sense of it, and everybody feels good with it, therefore, because it makes some overarching sense, and they feel great because they think they're on the right side. But it's nothing more than just this kind of terminal form of violence, and it's nothing to do with the gospel, as I think the gospel plainly, clearly presents itself as Jesus as non-violent, as the manifestation of God. So anyway, I just pray that this message will come through more and more as a popular message of evangelization. But anyway, what we're going to read now is Jesus' first of all what we call the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, and this is very essential to the gospel. It's this depiction of Jesus in the pit of terror and weakness. If you look at other contemporary kind of mythic heroes like Odysseus or Achilles, and then Alexander the Great, I mean, nothing. They never go. Nothing is ever described of them in those terms. This quailing terror in front of what lies in. He says, "My soul is grieved even unto death." And I don't know how many of us have ever got to that point where you feel grieved. That means anguished, wretched, overcome with fear and horror to the point of dying. You know, in other words, your whole sense of life is overcome by this. Now, the fact that this is described of Jesus at this point is highly, highly um, indicative of the character of the gospel. And I don't think we've not taken this on board. It's like it becomes a devotional thing. Jesus suffered for us. Well, that's really nice, and we love him for it. But he suffered in the service of a higher violence, which is the violence of God required of him or placed upon him in order to appease God for our sake. So it's penal substitution. So Jesus' suffering becomes a kind of like a sidebar, a piece of uh, incidental music in the overarching story where it doesn't really matter. The important thing is that he suffered and paid the penalty. It's not how he felt. It serves perhaps to illustrate it, but it doesn't do anything. His feeling doesn't do anything. But in fact, if you compare it with other literature, and this is the point I want to underline, it has to be doing something. The showing his feeling, his wretchedness at this point, is a communication that is essential to the gospel. So the agony in the garden in Gethsemane is part of what I would say, looking at it in a very different way, is the template of divine nonviolence in the world. In other words, Jesus faces the reality of our human violence, which, according to Gerard, is generative, is foundational, is what produces our culture and produces us as human beings. Jesus faces that, and that is the most terrible thing to have to face. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced being attacked by a gang or being possibly attacked by a gang. You know, that you could be waylaid by a gang. It's a very terrifying thing because you know, once they get you, there's no way out because they overpower you, and it's the sense of no human recourse. You know, normally in society there's the rules and checks and balances and things, and so you feel relatively safe. But once you fall into the hands of the enemy, and especially as a gang, you know, not an ordered military, should we say, but a murderous gang, it's one of the most terrifying things there is. And you know, we see it happening in the world to people like, say, Martin Luther King and Patrice Lumumba. I remember him when I was a young teenager. How they kind of they captured him, and it was in I think it was the Congo, and you know, he was surrounded by his enemies and put to death. It's a very terrifying function of human beings to get hold of a single person and kind of release all their violence on that person, and it becomes joyful. It becomes joyful on the part of the persecutors, the gang, you know, because they're totally in triumph, in control, and all their anger and violence goes on this single individual. So we get a picture of this in the gospel. I mean, it's a photograph of it, and it's highly unique. I think there's nothing. N.T. Wright says there's nothing like it in ancient literature. There's nothing to resemble it. So the question has to be, why is it there? Is it just, as I say, incidental music, or is it actually critical to the whole communication of the gospel? And I would say, of course, it's the latter. And so that's what we're looking at tonight, and then the actual arrest by the gang. You come out to me with swords and clubs. Why are you doing this? I mean, they've got swords and clubs. and that's what happens. So that's the material we're looking at tonight. So perhaps we could read that together. Are we looking at chapter 14, verses 32 to 42? I think that's right. Hang on. Let me just confirm that. 32, no, sorry, 32 to 51, sorry. We'll read the whole thing. So we're going to read chapter 14, 32 to 51, if someone has got that.
I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." He came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you will not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. He came a third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Then they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to them, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." And all of them deserted him and fled. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So it's highly dramatic and emotional material. Do we have any initial responses to uh, this account?
Didn't realize that in Mark, Jesus doesn't heal the guy's ear.
No, that's very telling, and we have these kind of composite versions of the gospel, and that's from John. But in Mark, he doesn't heal his ear. No, in John's gospel, we even have his name. We even have the name of the guy whose ear is cut off, Malchus, and so that's kind of like indicative of some of the source material of John, should we say? It's related to the high priest, the community around the high priest. But in Mark, it's just it's just the servant or slave of the high priest, bang his ears off, and that's it. Anything else? Go ahead, Sheila.
But what is the significance of the young man who ran off naked?
Oh yeah, I know that, and that's only in Mark. That
Is
bit
it?
there is only in Mark, and we will return to it. But in brief, the explanation I've seen, and that persuades me, and I will come back to us. Like I say, it's a signature. You know, like in a painting, you'll have the artist will put his name or his or her name in a corner somewhere, hardly visible. This is the signature of the author, because it's such an incidental detail that commentators said, well, it has to be personal. It's something that happened to somebody, and it's hardly likely that you would record it about somebody else if it doesn't have obvious significance for the gospel. So they say this is another Mark and wink, you know, where Mark says, let the reader understand, and he's talking about Nero. Here it's a kind of let the reader understand I'm talking about myself, that he's talking about him. This is a person's direct experience of Mark, the author. Now, I mean, it's a hypothesis, but it's as good as any, I think, and I kind of like it. That he would, I mean, it says that all his disciples deserted him, and then it tells this extra little story about a young man who followed him. So it does with the disciples, and then this is another story about someone who's following him, and he's only wearing his nightshirt, which seems like a first-hand personal experience. I was only where I rushed out, whatever it was, and I was wearing my nightshirt, and they tried to grab me, but I escaped naked.
I wonder.
Sorry. Go ahead, Ray. Go. Ray, I can't hear you.
Okay, never mind.
Oh, don't. I can hear you now.
There might be something wrong with the computer. I just was wondering.
You're very
Was
muffled.
also
The connection there, Ray, is very poor.
okay. Never
Yeah,
mind
we-
it then.
Yeah, it's coming in and out, the sound. We're catching every other word.
Maybe
Write
put it
your,
in the text, in the
write your
chat.
little piece. Write it in a text. Yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead, Mac. Mac.
So one thing I notice is that the apostles all throughout Mark have been unable to grasp the concept of a suffering Messiah.
Oh yeah.
And here we see Jesus becoming, in fact, the suffering Messiah in a full-fledged way, and they can't participate or grasp it. All they can do is sleep, and so they are not with him at all in what he's becoming and what he's experiencing.
I think there's. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. That has to be true. But there is a degree of witness. I mean, I think it's very interesting, and it gets into the discussion of the actual text. Is that Jesus tells the overall group to sit down or just rest, or whatever, and he takes 3 with him.
Yeah.
And these are the same 3 as he took to the Mount of Transfiguration. So they're the kind of privileged witnesses, and in fact, they're getting the inverse of the Transfiguration experience. And then he tells them verbally. He actually says, "I am so depressed. I am so." He tells them directly, "I feel so awful. I feel so terrible." So there's an intended witness on Jesus's part. I mean, I'm not arguing at all with what you're saying, but I think that witness element is very important. He actually says to them, I feel unbelievably bad. He says that. And then he goes a little further and he cries out, Abba. And I want to come back to that. And I think that's witnessed as well. The three returns, I don't know, coming back 3 times. is a kind of like structural motif. There's the three predictions of the Passion, etc. So whether they actually remember that, but I think the fact that their eyes were heavy with sleep was that they were kind of paralyzed by what they saw happening to Jesus. I mean, I think they were. I think what you're saying, they were utterly unable. I mean, if you think they'd seen Jesus always in control before, and this wonderful spirit that he had of being able to answer every challenge and to be so decisive in what he was doing and to have this relationship with his Father, and then to be confessing this awful agitation and anxiety, would have been very shocking to them. And I think they did back off. I think it was so shocking that, just exactly as you say, they could not stay with him. They literally retreated from him. And I think that would be true of, I mean, just in normal circumstances. I mean, we tend to shy away from excessive suffering unless, of course, we're trained in some ways and we have some solution. But there's only so much that we can witness on the internet of suffering, etc. So in those circumstances, I think they were paralyzed by Jesus' suffering. They couldn't relate to it, and then they ran away. But so that all heightens the intentional narrative of the exceptionality of suffering that Jesus is undergoing. No other human being can be with it. Go ahead, Sheila.
You've covered it much more succinctly than I'm thinking.
No.
We're seeing Jesus at his most human.
Yes, we are. Deeply, deeply, deeply human.
And they're going to sleep. And ultimately, when the crunch comes, Peter denies him.
Right.
You have the feeling that up to this point, they hadn't completely understood what was happening.
No.
What Jesus was and what they have. It all happens after the crucifixion, doesn't it? That they realize what they're dealing with.
Yes, to some degree, but I would say, in line with my kind of opening remarks, that we're only just now beginning to understand what it was about.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
That only exceptional souls in the Christian tradition, had any kind of inkling of the depth of surrender that Jesus went to. And that they constructed it in kind of mechanical and transactional terms which they could understand.
It's all terribly human, isn't it? It's
Sorry?
It's all terribly human. It's wonderfully human.
It is incredibly. So say a little bit more about that, Sheila.
Well,
why is it so incredibly human? Why is it so incredibly human and also terribly human and wonderfully human?
I suppose it's in a sense how Jesus' reaction. He's almost as if he's saying to his Father, "Do I have to do this?"
Right. Yes.
And the others, in the meantime, are out cold, as if the whole situation is
Which we all would be. I mean, I would do that. I know I would freeze.
Yeah, exactly.
In my unredeemed self, I would totally freeze.
And then we'd all deny that we actually knew him when it comes to a crunch.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is what I find is so extraordinarily.
Right. So your point is this is a depth of humanity.
Yeah.
Of the weakness of the programmatic weakness of human beings that we cannot. How do we deal with violence? Well, we put it on someone else, and if it's happening to a friend at this level, in the story, they can't take it.
Yeah, exactly.
So they distance themselves from it. So it is human in a way that humanity has not been displayed before, I think.
Yes, I think so.
It's a new picture of humanity. And that is why it's so, the whole Passion is so beloved by artists.
Yes. Yes.
that there's something here that is such a wonderful theme for an artistic vision. Like there's something here that we don't properly understand, but it's wonderful. Let me try and paint it. So,
Yeah.
so Dan, and then Ruben.
Yes, it is an example of what all humans have to experience, but it's also so transcendent that the divine would allow this degree of vulnerability
Right,
out of love for humanity, that I want to emphasize the other side of the story. And my own translation didn't help me at all, but the passage that I find so succinct and as sort of summing up the whole gospel, and yet it's not translated very well in my translation, but it's this passage: I was among you teaching in the temple day after day, and you never laid hands on me.
right,
But this is to fulfill the scriptures.
right,
And they all deserted him and ran away.
right,
Now, whenever I see this passage, this is to fulfill the scriptures. I now, a bell goes off, and I say, I know that I should be in control of layers upon layers of meaning here, and I hope that in our discussion tonight you can help me kind of flesh out the full kind of dimensions of that reality, that
right.
somehow this is not fulfilling a couple of texts. This is
No,
not just yeah, I prophesied that this was going to happen, and that's not what this is about. It's really uh, this is about God's kind of infinite, compassionate
yeah,
assuming
yeah,
of our vulnerability in ways
yeah,
that I can't get my mind around.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're saying that it's that 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 you what you're seeing in the text is God's revelation in this text. Like the vulnerability and the weakness, non-violence of God is that's what's coming through. Is that what you're saying is coming through in this text?
Revelation of the nonviolence of God.
Yeah, yeah. Which is that's absolutely right. That on the one hand, as exactly as Sheila says, this is incredibly human on so many levels, and yet in its depth of humanity, and this is the Christian mystery. This is where you're touching the Christian nerve. Like if anything constitutes Christianity as a movement and a message, this is it. That in depth of humanity, which is appalling, somehow or other God is revealed. That as Dan just said, the infinite nonviolence of God is revealed. And that makes it both, in some degree, unbearable. Because we don't like that. We don't like that. We much prefer to have the ordered universe of God in charge and be prepared to use violence. But then if we give that up, it's just this overturning of the world as we know it. And yet it pulls at the heart at the deepest possible level. It's like a heart attack. It's like a cultural historical heart attack for humanity. Um, uh, Bringing us to a place that we'd rather not be, but actually that is the place of the most profound revelation that the Bible and especially the New Testament brings. And that is the Christian nerve. I mean, that's the authentic taste of Christianity. That's what I would say. Ruben.
Yes. I wanted to make two comments, 2 points. Just as a reminder that when I read Girard and he talks about the uniqueness of the Christian Gospels, I think you pointed out this, that it's from the perspective of the victim,
Mhm.
which is unique to demythologize violence, that it's
Mhm.
we actually get an insight into what the victim is feeling and that he's innocent. So I think that's a this is like a salient point right here, right now.
Mhm.
And the other one is, yes, we see or we hear from the Jesus point of view, the agony and the betrayal that he's feeling. But also we can empathize on a human level with his disciples, because who cannot empathize with staying awake when sleep overpowers you so much and you
Same for
really
depression,
cannot
I would say.
fight it.
Depression.
You
Yeah.
really cannot fight it, but submit to death, to
Mm.
sleep. Who can empathize or sympathize or identify with as critical or crucial it is to stay awake and accompany your rabbi in the
Yeah.
very important period.
Yeah.
They're just falling asleep because what Morpheus is just doing his job and making them fall asleep.
And also their psychology. I mean, I think, like, um I remember um my son Liam would fall asleep when he was miserable about something. He would just go to sleep, get away from it. But I mean, he'd wake up feeling better. But I mean, he would just it was a healing thing, as a natural self-healing thing. So when you can't deal with something, it's best thing just is to some degree is to sleep if you can. And I think that's all rolled into it. It's you'd rather be asleep than be awake where Jesus is. I'd rather not be awake in his world. I'd rather be asleep in mine. And I think that's what this has been depicted as. Is a highly, highly unique depiction of a human of what happens to a human. You've got some of it in the Old Testament. You've got Jeremiah, his lamentations, his confessions, the suffering servant, but none of it is as immediate and is really terrifying as this. This is very real. It feels very actual. It's not literary or uh, Jeremiah is writing poetry about his situation. Jesus is not writing poetry here. He's in this exceptional position, like you say, the victim, and the victim who is alone. He at this point he does not feel vindicated. He says, "Please take this away from me," and that's another part to bear in mind, is that uh, it struck me today. I don't know what you think, but if Jesus is going to leave behind the gods of violence, shall we say, put it that way, the way the world is structured out of the gods of violence, even including Yahweh of the Old Testament, who was prepared to use violence, as we know. If he's leaving all that behind, even his beloved Father cannot stay with him, because then his Father is involved in a kind of defense against the gods of violence. Jesus has to be exposed absolutely to the condition of the victim of violence in the world, and yet he has to sustain it. He has to sustain his self-giving, his purity of heart, the relationship from his side with his Father. So that's where, you know, he's pouring out his life. So that's why in Luke's version of it, he sweats blood. Luke shows him kind of pouring out blood at this point. And physicians say that is actually possible. But Luke uses it as a kind of a depiction of the utter distress. There's no point of safety for him, and he's being poured out. So it's the moment. This is really the moment of the passion. Afterwards, what happens on the cross is something we can identify physiologically. You know, to have a nail driven through our feet and stuff like that, we know what that would feel like, or have some imagination of it. But what's happening here is the unique thing, the particularly unique thing to Jesus' situation. And what I think gives it away there, or signals it in some way, is the word that he says in verse 41. He comes a third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up. Let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." So you switch dramatically from this moment of intense interiority to the arrival of the mob. I mean, that's what's going to happen next. It's the mob that arrives to capture him. And the dividing point between that interiority, that terrible internal experience of Jesus, and then the external event is that word enough. Now, in the Greek, apparently, that's a word that you would use in common parlance if you were doing a deal with somebody and you said, like when you go to the checkout, or, you know, get a coffee or something, they say, "You're all set. You're good. You're square. You're all square. It's all squared away." That's the word. So if you were selling a horse or something, I don't know, selling a donkey, and you came up with enough shekels for it, and the purchaser or the buyer would say, and the purchaser would say, "We're square." It actually means to have off, or literally means to have off, to have away. It's getting something by putting something somewhere else. So it really is a kind of like a kind of payment that being paid for something else. So that's this kind of literal meaning, and that word is used. It's almost as if Jesus says, "I've done it. I've paid what I had to pay," because he then has to go on physically to endure capture and mockery and then crucifixion. He still has 15 hours in front of him before his death. So that signals that he's able to gather the forces to do that. Dramatically, in the text, there's a transition, as I say, from the interiority of his distress and anguish, to then going on with the story and being able to answer his captors, like Dan just read to us, then clearly and with force. So he has to transition out of that, and he does. And in Luke's gospel, Luke, who seems to be very attentive to the physiological and almost psychological condition that Jesus is in at that point, he's the most attentive to that. He says angels came to minister to him. So if something happens to Jesus at that point, whereby he gets out of this moment of absolute terror and is able to move on with the story. Uh, did Gerald, did you have your hand up? And then Ruba.
I do. So let's see, I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So, as you've been talking and as we've been reading this, this so many questions and so few answers, really.
Yeah, that's right. Yes,
Um,
it's full of human questions.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have this crowd come with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders, and you would think, what this crowd mentality that buys into this scapegoating violence, this officially sanctioned mob. This is not a spontaneous mob. It's officially sanctioned and stirred up purposefully. I mean, it's the same question I asked today. Like, don't they have any, where's the human shame? Are we not ashamed to be this human member of this awful mob?
Absolutely
And
not. Absolutely not.
yeah, well, and so we see this, it's played out on our screens every day right
Yes,
now
it
in
is.
this
That's
country. You have the official mob circling around a brown person or a person, any person, a person that's got their child right there or whatever, and they come with their masks and they're not. It's the same thing, but there's no Jesus there, really. Jesus is missing from the. It's like this. It's like this moment in history where Jesus was in this moment of history. Before this moment, there were many mobs and many terrified people. And after this moment, there are going to be many mobs and many terrified people, even to the present moment and beyond in the future. And so, what does it tell us that in this historical, if it's historical, but in this
I
snapshot of
think this.
time,
Go ahead. Sorry.
there is the Son of God in the middle of a scenario that plays itself out over and over and over again. And yet this time we have the Son of Man there, So anyways, what I've been thinking, no answers, just questions.
Oh, I mean, that's one beautiful description. What does it make you feel?
What does it make me feel?
How do you feel about that? I mean, you just described many terrified people before this happened, many terrified people before after it happened, and then this one moment in history, which is like it freeze frames the whole thing. What does that mean? How does that freezing of the moment in this story? This is the gospel. It's written down almost 2,000 years ago. It's a bit of cultural. It's a cultural artifact. It's extremely important in our culture, even though we don't understand it, but it's there. What does it make you feel or think?
Well, there was a time that I felt that that's really a circular answer. Today, it's hard to get in touch with your feelings. They're so terrifying. They're so
Yeah.
terrifying.
Okay. All right.
But
Okay.
yeah, but I mean, I would like to say Jesus, in some way, or the story in some way is there every time this happens.
Yeah.
Every
Right.
time.
Right.
But I'm not sure I believe that, and yet I do believe it at the same time. It's like a
Yes.
belief and non-belief that
I
coexist.
understand. Yeah, I understand. And the very fact that you described it the way you did, it was like it was like a triptych. You have the before and after and the bit in the middle. That's a triptych. To present it like that means that he is there every time, at least symbolically or semiotically, at least in terms of meaning, he's certainly there every time. And he brings it to the surface. Ruben.
Yes. Speaking of triptychs, I wanted to reference the Picasso painting above you, behind you,
Oh yeah,
the
right.
Guernica, which is
Yeah.
the classic scapegoat mechanism at work.
It
And
is.
that's what I think I was very hopeful when I first read Girard, because I thought, okay, here's a way to stop or to end violence, the way he says, by exposing it. But we seem to still perpetuate and continue the same scapegoating phenomena over and over again. And that's one question that's important and relevant, is that yes, we know about Girard. Girard has explained how, and others, how violence works and why it works so well to establish order. But what do we do now? What do we do next now that we know this, especially us, or we who understand Girard, the phenomena of violence, of scapegoating? And I think that is I'm at a loss, because it's still happening.
Yeah.
And I was so hopeful that with Girard and your teaching and Linda's, teaching, that we would make inroads into a nonviolence. And I do see that, but I think that's part of the messaging and the living out the gospel, by understanding that how violence works. And if it's not going to work, it's because we understand that it's not sacred anymore.
Right. We've demythologized it. So it is exactly the way Cheryl described it. It's just this horrendous repetition of terror. So that's demythologization. But Dan, were you going to answer Ruben, or do you have another remark, another question or something different?
I am very sympathetic with Ruben and all of the students of Mark, because Jesus hasn't really kind of, Matthew gave us lots of hints that this chapter was coming in Jesus' life, when he said, "I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your heavenly Father." There were lots of teachings that Matthew includes, that had Mark sort of captured in his narratives, might have made this scene a little bit more understandable, more easily, I don't know, grasped. But Mark doesn't give you those teachings. He doesn't. There are these parables of the vineyard, but it's a struggle to sort of see the radical nature of what Jesus is about until you come to this moment. So it's a shock, I think.
It is a shock, but you've got to remember that Jesus' actual ministry, as recorded in Mark, was full of overcoming violence. When he's liberating people from the demonic, from the internal dysfunctions of violence within individuals, and especially the Gerasene demoniac, there was something about him that set people free. So we were already told that his ministry was powerful over violence.
Well,
So, I mean, it's not, I agree with you, there's no formal teaching, yes.
I greatly appreciate the fact that you emphasized that conflict, that the battle with violence in Mark's encounters.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to read those stories and not see it in those terms.
Right.
And so you've prepared the way in a sense, in ways that are kind of unique, I think, because you've already gotten it. But
I mean, I see the gospel holistically, especially because we've done Mark before. At the end of Mark, Jesus says, "Go to Galilee,
Yeah.
and there you will meet him."
Yeah.
So you have to do the thing all over again. You have to keep doing it. Go ahead, Linda.
I was going to say something along those same lines, that if you see the gospel as a whole, with the setting free from the demonic, from the I mean, the whole gospel is very much a modern kind of it's very relevant for today, because it's just filled with Jesus confronting violence. I mean, it struck me this time round more forcefully than before when we've done Mark before, but it's so real. Mark is very real, as you say, Dan. By the time Matthew comes along, they're kind of fleshing it out with teachings, church teachings, and how to actually put this all into action. But with Mark, you've just got it. You just got the gripping narrative of Jesus' whirlwind, life, starting with the demons and the healings, the confrontations with all those authority figures, and then his arrest and the agony in the garden and the crucifixion. And you don't even get what you find in Matthew and Luke with the sort of more the resurrection stories fleshed out too. But what you get is this amazing kind of figure emerges who takes that on, and what makes it work, so you don't just think he just got squashed, is the resurrection. And the resurrection, because the fact that the gospel was written, the gospel's existence itself is a result of the resurrection. And so it's almost like the resurrection is there as the thing that makes the whole thing work. Without the resurrection, it would be overwhelmingly desperate. It's like this guy who's thrown himself on the wheel of history, as I can't remember which, Schweitzer said, that he throws himself on the wheel of history, and the wheel turns and he's crushed.
Yeah.
Well, but the resurrection is what you kind of have to read this gospel as someone who's just received the gospel back in the early first few years after Jesus' death and resurrection. And with the kerygma, I mean, it's a sort of a written form of the kerygma, the spoken word of those early Christians. And they had an incredible courage and joy, like they did. Their lives were turned completely upside down, and they're witnessing in the Roman Empire in the heart of the beast. They're out there, and that has to be the resurrection that's makes all this. You have to see it through the lens of the resurrection to make any sense of this sort of passage, I think. I don't know if I made myself clear, but I mean, that's kind of what I think. I feel like, in fact, if you see it through resurrection eyes, then this becomes very, very hopeful for our time, where we look on our TVs and we see like violence everywhere. It's not much different from what this Gospel of Mark is full of violence, and Jesus, interacting with people who have been wounded by violence or taking on that violence. And so it's very relevant for us today, and it feels very real. There's a sort of gripping, real pressing immediacy to it that I find kind of good, actually, attractive.
Thank you, Linda. Dan.
You know, I still think that reading Mark, it would be very easy for me to say, what a marvelous story of the Son of Man and the Son of God, and yet not realize that I'm called to be transformed in that same pattern. And that is to say, the stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Okay, that's Jesus. That's not me.
Mm.
But it's taken me all four gospels, especially John,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
for me to get the message that we're called to this transformation, that we're called to this other way of being human.
Yeah.
And so I need more than just that my leader has done this. I need to be invited to uh, an active role in that mission.
Yeah.
Mark,
Well,
I think Mark has missed the boat a bit.
Well, I don't know, but anyway, I mean, you've got to remember that the four is like the First World War leads to the Second World War. You can't see the two separate from each other. It's like Mark's gospel then leads to the other gospels, certainly the synoptics, because they more or less repeat Mark word for word. I mean, if you go through the text of Matthew and Luke, they have the whole sequence of Mark almost without any change in order. In other words, it's almost like a scissors and glue job. They get the Gospel of Mark, and then they stick in and on and around all these extra traditions, which like they say, it's the source, the Q source, but whatever it is, that's another set of tradition. But Mark is the basis on which the other gospels worked, and you kind of have to have that. Go ahead, Gail.
Well, I've been asking myself through all this discussion, what does this have to do with me?
Uh-huh.
And it seems to me many of us, especially our leaders and our politicians, are like Judas with the crowd behind them, kissing
Right.
Jesus.
Go on.
Well, kissing Jesus and betraying him as they do.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's wonderful that you can give that interpretation, because I think, is it Caravaggio has a picture of Judas kissing Jesus? I think he does. And it's so powerful.
Yeah.
It's light and dark, and Judas is in the dark a little bit. Jesus' face is in the light. You can see the intensity of what the artist saw. But the thing is that we're seeing it today in terms not just of art, but of our contemporary human situation, and that is the wonderful thing. I mean, if you've got that lens, you say, well, that is the contemporary. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
That our leaders are kissing Jesus as Judas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's good.
Well, and the other image that stands out to me, of course, is the young man. Everyone else seems to have denied Jesus by departing very summarily. And there's one act of violence by somebody who cuts off an ear, but then he's gone too. But the young man has awakened from sleep, apparently, and is there following Jesus. And his garment, his linen garment, is ripped from him, and he's exposed too, but at least he was there as long as he.
I think that's the point I was going to end on. I think that's marvelous.
Yeah.
That if this is the signature wink of Mark the writer, he said, "I ended up naked,"
Yeah, yeah.
and that word "naked" there is extreme. It's not casual.
Mhm.
It's not incidental. He's saying, to get this thing, I had to be naked,
That's right.
stripped. So the guy who had the sword, who in John's gospel is Peter, and he acts in quotes heroically, but in the old way.
Yeah, yeah.
And Jesus completely refuses what he does. It's after. It's noteworthy that after it's the strike on the slave comes before Jesus negates that, because have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? If he would, it's an implied critique of Peter who wielded the sword, because that would be the action of a bandit or the action of a violent person to defend yourself against counter-violence. But he says, no, that's not what I'm doing. Have you come out to me with clubs and swords as if I was a violent man? You should read it that way. That word bandit should be read as if I was a violent man.
Mhm.
I was with you every day in the temple and I offered no violence. You didn't try to arrest me then. Why are you treating me as a violent man now? Because that's not what I'm doing. I'm allowing you to do your thing in order that it may be exposed and brought to the light. I've actually tricked you into coming to get me as a mob, as an armed mob, so that everybody hereafter may see it and say exactly what you just said. Well, that's what everybody's doing, and that's what Cheryl said. That's what we're all doing all the time. But we don't think that, or it's very difficult for us to think it, because we want to think we're right. Our violence is the correct violence, and the other guys are the bad guys. We need to kill them. But then Jesus is actually formally exposing that, and that's wonderful. And the mark and signature, if that's what it is, he's saying ultimately, if you're going to do this, if you're going to follow this path, in kind of what Linda's saying, if you're going to be a Christian in first century Rome, you have to be naked. You cannot come at this with any formal power the way Rome has it. You have to be weak before Rome, but strong in the testimony of Jesus.
Yeah.
So it's I see it as a baptismal thing that if you want to be baptized, you really should be naked.
Mm.
You need to get your clothes off and go
And
in.
I'm just responding to Dan's point. I mean, I think when with Mark's gospel, it's a pretty simple message. You kind of get the sense of that early Christian community that, I mean, at the end of the gospel, basically, it just says they went out and proclaimed the good news, basically, I think. I mean, I can't remember exactly, but they didn't.
No, the end of the gospel is they ran away and said nothing to anybody. That's
and they
one
were
of the
afraid.
added endings. There are two added endings, a shorter and longer
Oh,
one.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
They
the shorter
fail,
one,
they fail at the end of the gospel.
except
have
for
to-
they're directed to go back to
Yes, that they're directed.
to
You have to go back
Galilee.
and learn the meaning of everything you've experienced because you don't know it yet.
Yeah, you have to strip
That's the way
yourself
I
off.
take. That's the way I take the end of the gospel. But sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking that, I mean, you don't get the sense that at the time Mark was written that there was a really well-established church. I mean, there was a
No.
Christian community, but as in terms of organization, it was very primitive. And so you kind of get the feeling that what they really want to do at this point, it's just that very simple message that Jesus died for us, for human beings, to change the situation that we're in. And and he rose again, and that's changed everything. And so we don't have to, I mean, it's just the basic message of the death and the resurrection of Jesus taking on the world and triumphing over the world, systems of violence or whatever. So they're not really, the gospel's not really trying to do anything more than that message, get that message out. I don't think they thought it through. The authors thought it through tremendously. Definitely not to the extent as by the time Luke and Matthew come on board, where they're really trying to form a community, you know, a church.
I mean, I think Dan's point is both. I think both of your points are valid, because I think Dan's point is that we don't have four gospels by accident. They're there. They're necessarily there. We need the four gospels. But then, if you read Mark as the first out of the gate, which is what it is the first gospel to be written, and then you see how absolutely stark it is, how Jesus it does absolutely counter the violence of the world. I mean, he is this incredible activist. There isn't, if you take Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Che Guevara, anybody who's a well-known activist, no one equates to the activism of Jesus in terms of turning the world on its head. And Mark's gospel is that primitive description of that. But as with art, there's different genre, and you can like one genre or another, but as long as you're getting the revelation of God. But I just want to draw your attention now to one thing that will help kind of reinforce what Dan said there initially about this has been the revelation of nonviolent God. So there in verse 35, after he says that he feels absolutely terrible, and going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want. Now we know that is an Aramaic word. Abba is Aramaic for father. There are a number of Aramaic words in the gospel, like Talitha Kumi and Ephatha. They're repeated in the gospel, I think, because they had become memorable, and the traditions remembered the power of those words by Jesus. But this word Abba is the one Aramaic word from the Gospels that turns up most in the overall New Testament. So if you look at Romans 8, chapter 8, verse 15. Just let's read that. Romans 8, verse 15, if you read that. If someone's got that. Anybody who's got that? Romans 8:15?
I can read it.
Yeah, please.
Okay, you go ahead.
Who's got it?
So I got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of sonship, when we cry, Abba, Father.
Right. So arbitrarily, or seemingly arbitrarily, Paul introduces into a teaching to the Romans written about the year 54 or something like that. You did not receive the spirit slavery, but a spirit of sonship, and that you are sons and daughters of God. And you know this because you cry out, and then he shifts to Aramaic. He doesn't say father in Greek, or actually does. He adds father in Greek, but he says the Aramaic word Abba. If you go to Galatians 4:6, you see exactly the same thing. Galatians 4:6. If someone had that.
Galatians 6.
Chapter 4, verse 6.
Okay, it says, and because you are children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a child, and if a child, then also an heir through God.
So that is standard teaching in Paul, using the Aramaic word for daddy, a familiar word in a family, for the father, daddy. And it's obvious that it was standard usage in the early Christian communities. Where is this going to come from except that usage by Jesus? This very familiar Aramaic word, this familiar language in an Aramaic culture transposed into a Greek and Roman culture, become familiar for Christians. Why would it have that potency and that immediacy, as Paul is saying, you cry out, Abba, unless it had come from the Spirit of Jesus, both in terms of the actual word that he used and then what he communicated by that word. So my feeling is that the fact that they recall him in that incident, in that instance in the Garden of Eden, using that word in these desperate circumstances, is one, an indication of the historicity of the event, because it's so deeply personal, and because it echoes through the rest of what else is going to spur the Christian community to be so confident and strong in the usage of that word, except that Jesus used it in the most desperate of circumstances. So it is, as I say, it both strengthens the historicity of the event, and then spells out what the Christian community took from that event, that we could cry out to Abba, Father, in the most desperate circumstances, because we are God's children in those desperate circumstances. And as we've been saying, we are safe from violence because that is the nature of the revelation of God that we have received. So it becomes, even, it's kind of what Dan was saying earlier on, even if it's so bare and desperate and terrible, it's actually a revelation of the non-violence of God, and in the full sense of that, the tenderness, the compassion, the intimacy, the closeness of Abba, Father, right in those circumstances. You see what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying? That it took the event in Gethsemane to make that revelation stick. You see what I'm saying? That it had to go that far for that revelation to get all the way through into the foundations of our human condition. And so that, I think, helps the question that's been raised a couple of times tonight. Well, how is this message ever going to get hold on people when they kind of do the opposite? I think it's because it's so real today. It's kind of what Linda's saying. We need the realism of Mark for the realism of violence in the 21st century. And Matthew and Luke lead us into the teaching, but it's the utter realism of the revelation of nonviolent God in the Garden of Gethsemane that we need for our 21st century. You see what I'm saying?
So,
go ahead, Cheryl.
So I appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate Linda's reminder that this is and also yours, Tony, that this is a circular teaching text.
Yeah.
And so that kind of, even that reminder helps provide a little bit of distance, saying we're going to look at this entire text as holistically. I really appreciated that reminder. And when we get all the way through it, then we're going to read it again, and then we're going to read it again, and then we're going to read it again. And so there's things to be learned here. It's interesting to me in this very violent scene where Jesus this is the peak to me of where he is refusing mimetic violence. He's refusing it, and he's refusing that whole system of mimetic violence. But it is the example of the people coming with the swords and the sticks and the stones and the violent behavior, because even in our very modern world and wonderful scientific discoveries and being able to see each other on this screen, it's still the mob surrounding the individual with very basic weapons that is so terrifying. That has not changed. It's been a constant forever. And
absolutely,
so that this story reminds me personally that the world that I live in is the world of being human, and the world of being scared, and the world sometimes of that terror. And we see it around us, and sometimes we may be personally affected. But if we're looking at a holistic story, one that we're not done with yet, the story's not finished yet, and we will get to the end, and then we'll say, okay, let's read it again. And, we'll have some comfort there because it's familiar to us. It won't be so shocking the next time around, and there are important things to learn here. So anyway, I just wanted to add that comment, and thank you for the conversation.
Well, I appreciate your comment, Cheryl. Thank you for that. That circular journey that you just described is so much the gospel journey, because the idea that you can get saved in an instant. I mean, I kind of believe that too. That you can make an act of faith, and it's so important. But semiotically, transformationally, it does have to be that circular journey again and again and again, and it has to be for the world. If you have to do it, if I have to do it, the world has to do it, and the Christian church has to do it. We have to go back over and over this again until we get it. It's like a teacher with a bunch of kids. Well, all right, you haven't learned the lesson. Let's do it again. Let's start over. And the kids go, oh no, we want out of here. No, we have to start over. We have to go back and start the lesson again. Claire.
I had been reflecting when Cheryl first mentioned where is Jesus in the current situation, etc. And in terms of this going over and over, I do wonder whether we can see some differences in the horror and shame we all feel now. Whereas in there they just left. And we know in previous times there wouldn't have been the same sense. But now I think we are filled with shame and horror. And basically we've just got to try and, as we go through it and through, find a bit more courage. But, I think that's a difference.
I think there is a difference. And we see that in the craziness of of media. On the one hand, they act like a mob, and the other hand, they feel bad about it, and you don't know whether you're coming or going with any of the commentary that you get. You know, it's this kind of constant flux. But I do think, you know, just like the process we've been on tonight, it's a very positive growth thing. You know, like there is, like you say, there is change. It's so small, or we may, because we like big results, we like quick results, but that's not necessarily the way this thing works. And the only thing is, we have to pray the prayer of that Jesus prayed for his disciples: do not be led into the time of trial. And he pray that you not be led to the time of trial. And it's the last petition of the last petition, but one of the Lord's Prayer: lead us not into the time of trial, but deliver us from the evil. That we need to have the space in which we can learn this. So that's a very important prayer, that the Lord will give us the space in which we can learn this. And that's in a way what Gerard despaired of. He despaired of having that necessary space. He said to me that to me on the phone. He said, "Do we have enough time?" I don't know whether we have enough time, but I pray for it continually, that we will have enough time. I don't want to reach a conclusion, a too rapid conclusion, because we don't know. And I pray that we have enough time so that this semiotic circle that we're on will permeate and have its effect.
I'd just like to make one little
Sheila.
comment. When we
Yeah,
talked about the situation and our leaders, I think the people who are surrounding this person that we've already been referring to, I think they're very they're sycophants. They're all on an ambition course, I think. But I think we have to have a certain sympathy for the other leaders around the world, because this is such a dreadful situation that if they took a tremendous stand, maybe things would get worse. And I think a lot of people are terrified of rushing in. I think Macron is being particularly outspoken, which is good. But we just hope the others will join him. Our man has just joined them. The idea
Has
that
it?
yes, he has.
You're talking about Palestine?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
He's come out in favor of the two-stage solution is the only way out of this. But a lot of others have not done it.
What is the name of your guy?
Albanese.
Albanese. Okay.
Albo to his friend.
Okay.
I think we have to have a certain sympathy for them, because I think they're all walking on hot bricks.
Right.
Wanting to do the right thing, but wondering if in the immediate it would not make things worse.
Well, that's true. That's looking at a thing from another perspective, and we don't know how those things are going to work out. I mean, the early Christians did pray for Rome. Tertullian said that the Christians prayed for Rome, even if Rome was persecuting them, the city of Rome. They prayed for Rome because, according to Tertullian, Rome held back, was a bulwark against worse things. So, I mean, there is a point that we have to pray against worse things.
I think we have to pray for our leaders.
Yeah.
Because they're
well,
not
we
all.
do that. We pray for our leaders. Thank you, Sheila.
They don't know what.
There's two things. There's this transformative circle that we're on, cycle, but then it's praying that the world sustains enough, and we pray for our leaders, like you say.
Yes, yes, yes.
Anybody else got anything any comments? I think we pretty exhaustively did those verses, those most intense verses of the gospel. Maybe I think even the crucifixion goes fairly quickly. They took him to the hill and they crucified him there. That was it. And so it happens very quickly. And then Jesus cries out, but there's no description of his internal state on the cross. But here we have his internal condition. Thanks to everyone for this is believe it or not a joyful message. It's joyful. It really is. We're set free.
And it's because of that relationship Jesus has with his Father. You know, that Abba Father that you were talking about, and that not what I will, but what you will, and the fact that the Father is willing to drink that cup. And so Jesus follows where his Father is because of the love he has for his Father. And so that's that relationship is so powerful.
It is. It is extremely powerful. Because you could think about it, that this moment is a moment in time. What Cheryl described it well. This is a moment in time when Jesus is in the garden. He's experiencing these things. You could isolate that moment in time. I think it's the year AD 30. People say it could be 33. One or the other. It has a very specific date to it. But at the same time, it's an eternal moment because of what Linda says. It's what the Father does. So it's where eternity meets time. The two repeat the same thing. Go ahead.
And I think,
Dan.
and then because we are pulled into that relationship, that same relationship through Jesus, our relationship with Jesus pulls us into that relationship he has with the Father. And so that's where the gospel becomes the proclamation of good news, really, that relationship.
Sure is.
And that's why it's joyful. That's why it's joyful.
It is totally joyful, yeah. Dan.
I've always been amazed at the way in which Rene Girard extracts from the Gospels such a powerful, succinct statement of his understanding of both this new revelation of God's creative action in creating a new humanity. And I'm wondering, this conversation tonight brings to mind the question, how do you think Mark understood the message of salvation? How do you think Mark, with his somewhat primitive or early sort of efforts to grasp the revelation, how I'm really just puzzled, but to kind of wonder how someone who was limited by this early understanding, how he saw the message of salvation, and how would that is that easy to kind of grasp in the gospel text itself?
I think that's a very important question. It's a very good question. And I think the answer is that for Mark, salvation is not at all formulaic. In other words, it's not like our kind of "are you saved" kind of thing, or the salvation of your soul that we used to talk about. I think it's I think his understanding of salvation is what we said before, is holistic, it's immediate, it's mystagogical, it's something that you enter into with your whole self. That's why he ends up naked there, if that's the correct reading in that passage. It's something you do with your whole body, every bit of yourself. And you can put names to it, you can put words to it. The whole thing about eternal life as a heavenly platonic existence has been a way of formulating it so people can get it in terms of kind of purchasable spaces, you know, something I can purchase, I can get, real estate, really. I have the currency, which is faith in Jesus, to get this real estate. But Mark doesn't give you any of that. He doesn't give you a formula even. But what he does give you is this overall, I think it's a baptism in all the words of the actual narrative of the gospel, the experience of the gospel, and it is an experience of divine love. I think in the end that's what it is, and I think Mark, if he's the same thing as same person as John Mark, so you have John Mark in the Acts of the Apostles, who was a companion of Paul, and then he split from Paul because he didn't want to go on. There was some bit in the journey and he didn't want to continue with, so he breaks from Paul, and he goes with Barnabas. So I think Mark was, if he's the same person, it's a way of just fleshing out the narrative. But I think he was a deeply, deeply spiritual person, you know, but he was a very immediate, concrete person at the same time. He wasn't like John, the author of John. John, who has this incredible power of the way he makes that narrative with Jesus's discourses and the figure of Jesus as being so incredibly powerful. The writer of Mark was much nearer the actual events. I think he got them firsthand from Peter, but there was something deeply mystagogical about his appropriation of the message. And the tradition, which I just read today, was that he went to Rome, and then he left Rome, and he became the first bishop of Alexandria in North Egypt. And that he founded that church, which became a very powerful the Alexandrian theology, you know, the alternative to Antiochian theology. And I think it's a highly significant. If you put those two together, and I think it's not unreasonable, I think he's a highly significant figure. And that was, his gospel is holistic and mystagogical, and you've got to enter into it with your whole physical self.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, it's time to go now. It's overtime. Linda, will you say a prayer for us, please? Laura's not here. I can normally pick on Laura, but she's always traveling around, Laura. Anyway, go on.
We pray for everyone here. We pray for a blessing on the upcoming week. We pray that you will build us up in faith and in hope and in love, so that we might become the salt in the world. And that this message that is so important, that it will begin to grow like a seed grown in good soil. We pray a blessing on your word, your proclamation of life and light in the darkness, life out of death. That it will come upon the earth and transform our world. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Linda. God bless everyone. Peace. Have a good week. See you next week, and then it's the week after that is our open mic. No, I think that's the way it is.
It's the 8th. It's going to be the open mic.
Okay.
8th of
All right.
August.
All right.
All right.
Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.